Oh, hey, Chris.
Hey Chuck, how are you?
I'm great. It's Wednesday morning. I'm here talking with you before a big OR day. What could be
I
better?
I know we're recording during the daylight hours, which is kind of an odd thing for us at times, but it's nice. It's a nice way to start the day.
Yeah, you were trying to get me to record last night, and it was getting late, and I'm old and was getting tired and need to bring the energy.
Well, I mean, I was solo parenting last night, and it was just a constant struggle. I kept losing the time limits I'd set on myself to make dinner, get the kids fed, and get them bathed and tucked in. And that honestly is quite tiring because by the time that I finish getting them down, I'm ready for a nap. And it's either I'm going to go to sleep at that point or I'm going to rally and stay up for another couple of hours. So even though we did in podcast last night, I did get some other stuff done. So
Excellent, excellent. So what's going on?
interesting case. I had a case recently that reminded me of one from a couple of years ago. So I had a patient at a couple of years back that presented with an FPL rupture after a volar plate. And I know we talk about this a lot, and we talk about how it can happen. We don't really know how often it truly happens, and we also know that the timeline, you have it happen pretty quickly afterwards, or it can be many years. Now, when I was talking to them about the reconstruction, because it was clear on examination that they had ruptured the FPL, I was looking into literature and didn't see a lot of true technique articles or mentions about how to actually repair the tendon or reconstruct the tendon. There are some articles that talked about how people did, but they didn't go into much detail about how they did the surgery. So how would you approach that case?
It's interesting because that has recently come up in discussion, and I'll be vague just because it's one of our partners, and it actually wasn't one of their cases, but it's timely. Um, and the options, as you well know, are, first of all, one could choose to address the thumb and say fuse the IP joint. I haven't ever really taken that approach because I do think the FPL certainly does more than just flex the IP joint, but that can be a reasonable and pretty straightforward option. I've always chosen to try to provide the FPL function. And to me, there's two ways to do that. One is tendon transfer and the other is interpositional graft. Um, I'll give you my bias in general. I do like the interpositional graft. It's not something we do very often. And it does depend on what you have to work with. Typically, the rupture is pretty proximal, so you have plenty of tendon to tie into. That's my general approach. Happy to talk in more detail. How did you think about this one?
Same thing. Obviously to me, the graft is appealing. The interpositional graft is appealing because, just like I talk about not leaving axons on the table, Marty talks about not leaving this huge FPL muscle belly on the table because the muscle belly is still good. The tendon's ruptured, but it's a huge muscle. And as you were saying, it's an important muscle / tendon in many ways. So I like trying the graft in the limited number of cases in which I've had to do this. I guess the graft considerations, what do you use as your donor?
Well, the no-brainer is a palmaris longus if present. It certainly is a bit smaller in most patients, but doable. And you can perform a nice pulver taft weave, or you can do an end-to-end depending on size match. If that is not available, I also think it's completely reasonable to use a portion of FCR. It is literally right in your field. You can take the whole FCR. We know that clearly from other procedures. I think either of those are acceptable and can be expected to have a good outcome.
Yeah, so in this case a few years back, there was no palmaris, and then I decided to use the entire FCR. And I hadn't done that before, and it was actually turned out a lot smoother than I thought. I always have a healthy respect for how much scar can form around the median nerve, even just a standard removal of volar plate without the FPL consideration. But carefully dissecting that away, even the palmar cutaneous branch, because that was visible in the field, and then harvesting the whole FCR and doing an interposition graft. I actually ended up doing a pulver taft on both ends, and went very slow with the rehab. Splinted them down with a dorsal blocking splint at the radial side of thumb spike, essentially with the thumb component going over the IP joint and a little bit of flexion. And then initiating basically treating it like a flexor tendon, like, dorsal blocking, initiating some gentle active motion eventually. But I left him in that dorsal blocking for quite some time and ended up fantastic result, very happy. But it was a little harrowing, just kind of figuring out how to deal with it, because it was something I hadn't had to treat before.
I'm going to stop for a second, Eric. We're going to have to cut this out. Your internet's coming and going. I don't know if you're plugged in or doing purely wireless. It's pretty good, just not perfect.
Yeah, I'm wireless in the office. Let me see if I can find a dongle to plug in. Hold on. Yeah. Notice this happens when I'm in my office. I don't know if it's the punishment I get for being in the.
No, it's me too in my office. It's annoying as hell.
Do you know on our phones which one? Actually, I can just probably take it from the back of my computer.
Yeah. Maybe.
Sorry, Chuck. Switch this. Let's hope for the best. I don't know if that's going to work. I've never used the Cat 5 cable on this before.
Yeah, I just leave them both plugged in. Anyways, okay, we'll jump back in. All right. Oh, that's awesome. So 2 questions, of course, there's always 2. The first is, I assume you released the carpal tunnel instead of jamming this FCR tendon through the carpal tunnel. And second, how did you tension it? Did you use tenodesis and check the position of the thumb? And do you over tension it slightly? Just talk briefly through that.
I had to do a carpal tunnel release to get the tendon. So, even though the site of rupture is at basically the watershed region where the volar plate is put in, it's just hard to go get it there. I mean, because everything is scarred in, and then I just get nervous about kind of working in that area at the wrist crease without seeing what I need to see. And even, when we opened the carpal tunnel, it was pretty apparent where it was, and it wasn't all the way retracted back, but it would have been hard to get there without releasing the carpal tunnel. So in this case, it was kind of neat from an anatomy perspective. I found the palmar cutaneous branch, found its little path adjacent to the carpal tunnel, not in the carpal tunnel, and released that, and just to get it out of the field. And then, it's a bulky thing to put in, and it's adjacent to the median nerve, and that makes me worried. Of course, we know that releasing the carpal tunnel will increase the volume in that area, but it still makes me worried because it's a bulky repair, and I tried to make it as tapered and smooth as we could, but we also know it's going to scar and it's not going to look like it does at time 0. So that was part of the impetus for doing at least some early active motion to get things gliding so they don't adhese down. And then tensioning wise, yes, tenodesis, wrist back, and then thumb down and IP flexion. And I did put it a little tighter because we know it's going to loosen over time. And we are going to be pushing it a little bit early on with the rehab.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Yeah, the degree of quote unquote over tightening kind of depends on how long the rupture has been there, because we know that proximal stump will retract and the muscle will somewhat, I don't want to say fibrose, that sounds permanent, but will tighten as well. And so I do a little intraoperative longitudinal distraction on the proximal stump to try to loosen some of that up. How effective that is, I'm really not sure, but I like what you said.
It'll be interesting to see if there aren't any good technique things out there. We should probably put one together next time this comes up, because it might be a nice little illustrative case thing, and if anything, it'll be published in a journal of the upper hand.
I like that. Speaking of which, I have some ideas around our newsletter, which is so far it's been overpromised and underdelivered. So I need to get to work on that.
Well, we'll talk shortly in our next episode about our holiday hiatus, and maybe that'll be our little project to keep us busy. Although maybe we don't want to be busy.
All right.
So some really cool listener feedback. It's been great. We've had some wonderful emails come in, and we'll save some of them for the future episodes. But this is a great email from Minnie Mao. She is a hand therapist. It looks like she's out at Stanford based on her email. But thank you for this email. Everybody can email us at handpodcast@gmail.com. And she wrote in saying how much she loves the podcast, saying that at least Chuck is engaging, educational, and entertaining. She actually said both of us, but we'll give you that. And she loves a deep dive episode. She says, as a hand therapist, I don't have as many opportunities as I'd like to be in the OR with our docs. So the descriptions of the surgeries from approach to technique to troubleshooting really helps me visualize and understand what each surgery entails and helps guide my rehab. You both have a great sense of humor and seem to be humble, thoughtful, and articulate surgeons. Have been listening since episode 1, and congrats on the 100th episode, which we will talk about in the next episode. But yes, we have reached 100. So Minnie sent in some fantastic ideas, and I want to incorporate many of them. But one that I thought would be great, since we are in the season of festiveness and gratitude, she liked the Thanksgiving episode. And she was wondering if we could do a follow-up, and we could start with at least one of these topics. A list of 3 people that influenced your career, 3 patients or cases you will never forget, and 3 things you would tell your younger self. So we can start with at least one of them. And Chuck, I will let you pick which one, since I know we got to get you to the OR shortly.
Yeah, well, I think we should go as far as we can. And Minnie, I want to say thank you for the very kind comments and for the great suggestion. We started early on with 7s. We talked a lot about 7s, but I like this a lot. Why don't we just start where Minnie started? When you want to talk about people who influenced our careers?
Absolutely. You have to start since you've had a longer career. Put it nicely.
Yeah. Well, this is I guess in some ways too easy. I'm going to talk about my 3 mentors, and that I certainly could find another 30 people probably who have positively impacted me and taught me different things. That's the beauty of this. And for those who are residents or fellows, one of the things I thought about when I was applying to residency and then applying to fellowship is trying to find a person who could serve as that mentor figure for years to come. And so I've been really lucky. From my fellowship, while I had great mentors across the board, Peter Stern obviously stands out. What Dr. Stern taught me is just an unbelievable commitment to education. Doesn't have to be formalized, although in his program it was, but just day in, day out, from beginning to end of the day, education is foremost. And I think that is incredibly important. It's easy to lose sight of and slip away from. But my first one is Dr. Stern, who I am fortunate to still keep in touch with and see not infrequently. So thank you, Dr. Stern. And maybe I'll flip it back to you for your first.
Well, I want to make a comment. I've gotten to know Dr. Stern more recently through doing firsthand with him, and it's incredible. I mean, his focus on education is apparent. I mean, that's why he was a natural choice for firsthand, and really it eminent that the development of that came from the Stern classic articles, which I guarantee you pretty much every hand fellow in America has seen that list and has participated in some journal club based on that list. So, incredible contributions to hand surgery, both in his writings, which are real and valid and are useful in practice, and then also in educating. One of our former fellows and a listener, Shobit Minhas, has always egged me on to try to get you to do a Mount Rushmore of hand surgery. And I haven't gotten you to do it yet, and we will in the future. But I was at a course recently, and I was sitting around with a group of hand surgeons of different levels of experience, and we were doing the after dinner cocktails, and I pitched this idea of the Mount Rushmore of hand surgery, and Dr. Stern's name came up more than once. So, it will be a good episode for us to do at some point. But yes, I can absolutely see how influential Dr. Stern has been for you.
The Mount Rushmore will take some preparation. It's almost like we need to start with a NCAA style bracket of whatever the number is, 32, maybe we could find, and then bring it down to the Mount Rushmore level of 4.
You realize we may not have many friends in hand surgery after this.
We'll have to have strict criteria.
Exactly. There must be data to drive this. So I think the first person I think of, and just in terms of starting my career outside of my father, obviously, in terms of influencing my career choice, would be Ann Ouellette in Miami. And she is a hand surgeon down at Miami. And at that time, she was at the University of Miami. Those of you that are listening in South Florida probably know her pretty well. She had trained at Seattle for her orthopedic residency, and afterwards trained with Buckwalter. And she was at the University of Miami when I was a medical student, and I was looking to do research. And at that point in the department, it was not easy to do research down there. And maybe she was the one who turned me on to hand surgery, because I ended up doing a bunch of cadaveric studies in the with her in the lab that led to several publications and kind of got me interested and got me I think the research cred I needed to be a competitive orthopedic applicant at that time. Led to me taking a year off to do research because I liked this so much. And she helped continue to position me for my career. I remember asking her about residencies after interviewing and feedback, and she was really encouraging of me to look into the program at HSS, and was really encouraging about, when I was making my rank list. And I still talk to her every time I see her at a meeting, or sometimes when I do make it down to South Florida, I make sure to see her. So yes, she's been incredibly influential just from a getting me started perspective, and showing me that a lot of things are possible even when you're coming from a place that didn't have a ton of resources at that time.
I love it. I love it.
I don't know if I can convince you to use the Herbert sling though. To stabilize the on the carpal joint, but one day maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Well, we'll keep talking. Number two also is a pretty obvious choice for me. That is Paul Manske. Dr. Manske was one of my residency educators, and then when I came back after fellowship, I would say he was my closest partner simply because we did congenital together. And the whole process of education about congenital hand surgery could be a topic of an entire episode. But the fact that I could work with Dr. Manske for 10 years until he passed away was a remarkable opportunity for me. Helped guide my continuing congenital education, and really made me quite comfortable with anything and everything that could walk through the door. Obviously, I saw things for many years exactly as he saw those things and those conditions. I've evolved, certainly, as I hope we all do. But wow, I feel very fortunate to have considered Dr. Manske a mentor, an educator, and obviously a friend as well. So really important to me.
I keep seeing, every now and then there'll be a former Dr. Manske patient that comes in, and they're just almost always completely through the roof about him. But, it's funny. There's one patient who came in who I wanted to do a thumb CMC injection on, and she almost talked me out of it because she had such a tough experience with an injection by Dr. Manske. And I was like, wait, this is literally the only not positive thing I had heard. And we all know that everybody has a hard time with injections, regardless of who's doing the injection. I was like, are you sure it was the right Dr. Manske? Like,
that is funny.
But she loved the injection, so it worked out okay. But it did take a little bit of words, some words to calm her down and get her going. So I know our number 3 is going to be the same. I'm fairly confident on that. So I will go with my number 2. And I'm not sure, honestly, I didn't think a lot about how to word this, so I'm just going to kind of go with it. But it's Dean Lorich at HSS. And he was an orthopedic trauma surgeon, and, he was not a perfect man by any means, but he was an incredibly influential educator. He was certainly not an educator that was for everybody, in terms of he was not to their liking in terms of how he taught. But for me, what I took away the most from him was an incredible appreciation for surgical technique, for discipline. And I think that, preparation for cases, holding all of us to incredibly high standards, whether it was floor care, ER management, or the OR itself, and being a mirror. Like, he was not afraid to tell you when you did not do well. And yes, he could have handled that in many better ways in terms of how he told people that. But I think there were many of us that responded to that for better or worse, and he pushed me to be a better surgeon. And I still use a lot of his techniques, at least in terms of anatomic dissection. I still think about how he thought about anatomic dissection. And I've honestly never prepared for a rotation more than the PGY3 rotation for on trauma. I mean, I would do so many cadaveric dissections just to get ready. And I think that appreciation for anatomy, that appreciation for discipline and preparation is something I try to pass on as much as I can to our trainees.
I think that's really well said. What I think about often is, in this age of resident education, sometimes that what might be perceived as hard-nosed perspective can get lost. And I think it's critically important to hold people accountable, to praise the good and challenge the bad, And that's, I think it's more challenging. Maybe I'm just speaking about myself because I know I struggle with this, but really nice to hear and super important.
I agree with you. I think it's hard to do that in this era. And that's nothing against the current generation of learners. It's just harder to do. It doesn't mean that you don't do it. I certainly think that the trainees that I've talked to appreciate it when we tell them very fairly and squarely kind of what to work on and tell them how they need to improve. It's much easier to tell somebody good job, pat them on the back, and have them move on. But I think it's our responsibility for things that deserve greater attention to give greater attention.
It is. It is. And again, not easy, remains important, and just one of those things that is our responsibility, really.
So let's go with your number 3.
Yeah, I'm sure our number 3 is the same. So Richard Gelderman was my, basically when I started as a resident, it was his first year as chair of the department. He built the department. He really literally built the department. And that's a remarkable opportunity. He took advantage of it, created a great department, taught me many, many things. Details matter. That's probably, if I had to say one thing, it would be that details matter. That's in our knowledge of anatomy. It's in our interactions. It's in our ability to understand and quote the literature. It's in our manuscript writing and the detail with wordsmithing. And Dr. Manske taught the same as editor general hand surgery. But so many things I could mention about Dr. Gelderman, but details, I think, is my foremost.
Yeah, he was incredibly into the details. I mean, to the point where you really had to wonder, why am I trying to learn this number? But I think at least when he was teaching me, and I can only speak to my experience as a learner with him, he was pushing me to connect the dots. And what I appreciated about working with him as a learner was the accountability. Still, I know that I think earlier on was much harder on his trainees. And I think he was still very much, he was tough on us, but it was coming from a good place. And I think that's the important part. And I learned a ton from him. And I think for me, the biggest thing was the career development path in terms of what I wanted to do as an academic surgeon and seeing the path to being an R01 funded surgeon and seeing what it took, the fire in the belly, the grit, the focus, the determination, all those things. I mean, you can fill an entire podcast with the lessons that he taught me just in that realm. But yes, our number 3s are the same. And I think that, we probably at some point, we keep talking about, we got to have him on the pod. I know that, his the format is different than what he's used to, but I think it'd be great.
I think you would too, which the story you told about Dean Lorich and your preparation for the OR does make me think about Dr. Gelderman and preparation for anatomy sessions. So just to frame it briefly, anatomy used to be every single week with the fellows and the residents on service. Now we do it once or twice a month. And it was incredibly intense. There was an expected format for delivery. There were no notes allowed. And, so you're spouting from memory with an incredible amount of detail. And when I was at PGY4, I was the chief on the hand service, and it was the chief who did the presentation. So it wasn't usually a PGY4. And so I remember cramming for hours. I remember sitting in the shower, at 4 a.m. the day of the presentation, reciting out loud the presentation I was about to give. But you know what? I'm better for it. I'm better for it.
I think that, yeah, you're right. That was a recital. But it's like the thing, you have to practice it so much that it doesn't sound practiced. And once you cross that threshold, then you've achieved the mastery of the anatomic presentation.
That's exactly right. I mean, again, I still remember those details today. So I love this. I do think on our next pod, hopefully we can find time to talk about Minnie's additional suggestions. But this was great.
I love it too. And, I think let's talk about Minnie's additional suggestions. Let's celebrate 100 episodes on our 102nd episode. And, it'll be fun. It'll be a good way to head into the holidays.
Perfect. I love it. Good to see you. Have a good day.
You too.